Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we're going to talk about a problem that many organizations experience, but that very few organizations diagnose properly and fix. And this is a big issue because, unfortunately, it turns out this problem is the leading cause of business failure by far. So let's talk about it. As you know, businesses spend enormous amounts of time, effort, and money trying to grow their sales, launching new products, investing in marketing, expanding sales teams, exploring innovation initiatives, and of course, serving their customers. Yet, despite all of that effort, commercial outcomes are surprisingly poor. Products fail all the time. Marketing programs underperform. Sales teams miss their quotas. And strategic initiatives stall with astounding frequency. As a result, jobs are lost, investments are wasted, and what look like great opportunities simply die on the vine. What I want to explore today is why this happens, why businesses fail, and introduce a framework that can help you understand the problem, help you prevent it, and help you fix it if it happens to your business. And where's my cursor? There we go. So here's what we'll cover in today's session. By the way, if you want to jump in on the conversation, if you have any questions, or if you want us to debug your situation at the end of the workshop, just go to the link you see here at the bottom at leadgen.com live. Anyway, first we want to look at the scale of this business failure problem because, as you'll find out, it is enormous. Second, we'll talk about the explanations that organizations usually give when things don't work out. Things like blaming competition, an inability to generate leads, not enough funding, and so on. We'll then talk about some of the things that businesses normally do to try to address the symptoms, but that generally fail to turn things around because they don't actually get at what the underlying problem is. Then I'll introduce the conclusion that we've come to after working with thousands of businesses over the last 40 years, specifically that most business failures are due not to external factors like competition and not due to incompetence or a lack of funding, but due to a flawed understanding of their own market opportunity, something that we'll call commercialization drift. To be clear, this is a huge issue because no approach that we're aware of today addresses this failure problem systematically for the general business. Most approaches maybe address some symptoms, something to help your sales function, something to help your marketing function, something to help you manage your books better or find better employees, or maybe to develop products faster. But what we've found when a business isn't thriving, when their sales are falling off, is that the reason is rarely just a problem with some function within the business, or even with the market, with competition, or with money. It's almost always due to a flawed understanding of the market opportunity and how the business is set up to address it. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone out there because if you think about it, how often when a business fails do people say about it that they missed the market? It's like, in retrospect, oh yeah, they missed the market. Well, great Monday morning quarterbacking. Where were you when they were putting the whole thing together? Anyway, recriminations aside, it turns out that that statement has a lot of truth to it. Of course, it's easy to point that out when they missed the market in retrospect. The important question is, what does that really mean? How do you get ahead of the problem? And how do you prevent it from happening in the first place? Again, in our experience, failure is rarely a problem just with sales or marketing or operations or money or product. The cause is usually cross-functional. So anyway, today we're going to talk about the evidence that there's a problem, the symptoms, and the consequences of the problem. We'll then introduce an approach that describes a way to look at your market opportunity that consistently leads to commercial success, or if you're already in trouble, it gives you a way to turn things around. And then we'll give you a short diagnostic tool so you can figure out whether or not commercialization drift, which is the main symptom of a flawed market opportunity definition, whether it might be affecting your organization. And then finally, we'll open the discussion up to some one-on-one analysis if anyone has hung around that long to talk about it. So let's keep going. There is no question that organizations are very good at activity. Product teams build features, marketing programs generate engagement, sales teams pursue opportunities, but the economic outcomes often fall far short of expectations. New products miss revenue projections, marketing produces activity, but no meaningful revenue. Sales teams pursue opportunities that never seem to close. Product or services sit unsold, or strategic initiatives absorb resources and then quietly fade away. This pattern is so common that many organizations simply accept it as normal. They refer to it as natural selection or creative destruction or portfolio math, or, if you'll pardon my French, stuff happens. But that raises an important question. Is the level of failure just the natural cost of doing business, or is something deeper happening? Before we try to figure that out, let's look at the data and see if the depth and scale of the failure even makes sense. Because on an anecdotal basis, sure, it's easy to chalk it up to, say, bad luck or bad timing. But if it's happening a lot, and I'm not even going to say what the benchmark has to be for this to look like a systemic problem yet, but if it happens a lot, maybe there's something else going on besides portfolio math. So let's look at failure from inside the business. When you're in the game, the subjective signals tend to be pretty murky that something's wrong, at least from a functional perspective. That is, let's say your revenue stalls while your marketing activity is increasing. You could theoretically blame the effectiveness of your marketing program, so you try to fix it and move on. Or let's say marketing generates leads that sales can't convert, so you blame your lead scoring algorithm and you try to correct it and move on. Or let's say your sales pipeline appears full, but your win rates decline. You could blame your sales team, so you get them some training and you move on. Or your sales cycle grows longer in spite of having all this automation, so you tighten up your funnel management, but the problem doesn't get any better and you move on. Or your KPIs look great, but revenue growth stalls. You name your poison. What do? I don't know. You try something else. If you're looking at these problems, though, from close up, it's all kind of murky. So you can easily say, just work harder, or let's buy another tool, or let's whack-a-mole this thing, and then you move on. But in many cases, it doesn't get any better. In fact, whatever you do, it just gets worse. Forecast accuracy goes out the window, so you end up with a moving hockey stick for a forecast. Or you try discounting in order to drag things over the finish line, and you end up losing money on every sale. Or you beef up the product in order to appeal to more prospects, and you just end up competing on price against other vendors who got there first. Congratulations. Welcome to the death spiral. And of course, don't forget the finger pointing when things go south. Sales blames marketing, marketing blames sales, finance blames everyone, product development blames finance, and then the organization responds in the only way it knows how. It doubles down, or it fires the lowest performing 10% of employees, and they use the savings to try some more stuff. That's not going to work. But the blood is in the streets. So let's look at the numbers, because if you're struggling, it may help to know that you're not alone. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, about 25% of all new businesses fail within their first year. Over 50% of all businesses fail within 5 years, and over 65% of businesses fail within 10 years. In other words, long-term survival is rare. Less than a third of companies make it past 10 years. And venture-backed startups show an even worse set of outcomes. Roughly 80 to 90% ultimately fail. And they have some of the smartest people in the world and more money than God behind them. And even among the surviving firms, many firms struggle financially. Over 2/3 of businesses today report having major financial difficulties. And amazingly, market demand issues alone account for 42% of all business failures. But let me ask you, what sense does that make? I mean, who would invest in a business that didn't at least have the market demand issue nailed down? That's nuts. But, it's someone else's money, so whatever, right? Yeah, no, not right. Let's keep digging. As we try to figure out why so many businesses fail And why so many businesses struggle, let's take a peek under the hood at what we see. And again, we've worked with thousands of businesses, so we've been there and done that. And when we look at it, we look at what's going on with their marketing programs, for example. Well, according to our anecdotal data, but more importantly, a number of studies that are out there, only 25% of marketing leads are qualified enough for sales engagement. That's not closing. That's just qualified to make it worthwhile for the salespeople to talk to them. 79% of marketing leads never convert to sales due to poor qualification or targeting. 94% of all trade show leads are never followed up. Typical e-commerce conversion rates are under 2%, which means 98% of visitors don't buy. Cold email campaigns produce response rates of 1 to 3%, meaning roughly 97 and 99% failure rate. And even among cold emails, only 3 to 5 conversations occur per 1,000 emails. And that's not closed sales. That's just conversations, not necessarily productive ones. It would seem like that would lead to a lot of failures. But wait, there's more. I love that line. If you look at sales enablement, it's just as bad. Large numbers of CRM implementations fail to deliver any meaningful productivity gains, with sales leaders reporting an increase in lost opportunities due to system complexity. Not more found opportunities, more lost opportunities. Marketing programs often show strong engagement metrics, but they consistently fail to translate into revenue growth. And digital campaigns generate traffic, but they deliver extremely low conversion rates relative to cost. And frankly, most digital campaigns don't even generate meaningful traffic. Across channels, digital, sales outreach, CRM, lead generation, failure rates routinely exceed 90% of activity. One of my favorites here. So let's look at how business leaders typically respond to this chaos. And here we find something called the tactical escalation trap. That is, when performance declines, organizations almost always reach for the same playbook. Each item sounds reasonable. Each one leads to more activity. Most fail to fix the problem. And more importantly, none explain the systematic pattern of failure that we're just looking at here. But let's look at it anyway. Typically what you hear and what they do. Sales says we need more leads, so marketing spend increases. Sales says the leads aren't qualified, so targeting models and scoring systems are added. Finance says sales execution needs improvement, so sales training and new leadership are introduced. Management says our messaging isn't clear, so they invest in rebranding and positioning initiatives. Sales says the product needs to be more competitive, so they add features and capabilities. Or sales says we need better tools, so they add CRM, marketing automation, analytics platforms. Or sales says our prices are too high, so discounting starts up. Or someone concludes the market is difficult right now, so you get strategy resets and new initiatives. It's like a hamster on a wheel. How does all this happen? One thing we could understand, but all of them? No. To be clear, if this was aviation, medicine, or engineering, no one would tolerate this level of failure. We're talking about 80 or 90% of commercial initiatives failing. Who's paying for that? Well, you are. You could say, well, it was good until the money ran out. But the fact is that this failure rate doesn't just impact the owners of investors. It affects the employees. 35% annual sales rep turnover, jumping to 65% by the 2-year mark because they didn't make their number, right? 30% annual marketing leadership turnover. 60% of sales reps miss quota each year. 50% of CMOs last than 3 years. Last less than 3 years. 80% last less than 4. 80% of employees are bounced when startups fail, and 90% startup failure rate leads to huge job loss and turnover. In other words, this failure rate doesn't just kill companies. It destroys careers, it destroys hope, it destroys families. When commercialization systems misfire, the consequences cascade through the workforce. Missed quotas, turnover, shortened tenure, and layoffs. So you could stick your head in the sand and say, this doesn't impact me, but it does. When you lose your job and you have to compete with 1,000 other people just for an interview, That hurts. It depresses salaries. It kills the job market. It makes it impossible for people to plan for their future, to buy a house, to pay off their student loans, to send their kids to college, or ever hope to retire. So sure, let's just hop back on that merry-go-round. Which is exactly what we do because we don't really know what's going wrong. We tell ourselves things that make us feel better, that shift the blame. Oh, yeah, the market became more competitive. The sales team wasn't strong enough. Marketing needed better targeting. We needed more leads. The messaging needs improvement. Pricing is the problem. The economy weakened, you name it, blah, blah, blah. But competition exists in every market. Yet failure rates remain consistently high across industries. Sales teams are frequently replaced or retrained, but performance volatility continues. Marketing tools have improved dramatically over the last 2 decades, yet conversion rates remain stubbornly low. Organizations increase lead volume without improving win rates or revenue growth. Rebranding and messaging initiatives are common, yet they rarely produce sustained growth. Discounting can temporarily increase deal flow, but it typically compresses margins without solving demand issues. Look, maybe these explanations and these solutions make sense in an isolated case, but do they really explain the pattern? And if there's something fundamental going on underneath all of this and you're not addressing the structure and the pattern, then you're going to fall victim when the Band-Aid you put on it doesn't work. And that's the issue. Oh, wait, I forgot. You could hire a consultant because even companies that have, access to fancy consultants fail, by the way, at virtually the same rate as anyone else. But let's look at it. Again, they're trying to solve the wrong problem. What do I mean by that? Approaches like these can improve execution if the problem is in a functional area that it's designed to address. For example, lean product development. Faster iteration improves the product, but it doesn't ensure that the product is being built for a clearly defined need and segment. Move fast and scale quickly. Speed assumes there's a good product market fit already, but when it doesn't, scaling magnifies the error. Let's try growth hacking and funnel optimization. Sure, it improves conversion efficiency, but it assumes that the right prospects are entering the funnel in the first place. Look at lead scoring and MarTech stacks. Sure, they provide visibility into activity, but they don't validate whether the target market itself is coherent. Same thing with brand building and repositioning. All very popular solutions to failure today, right? But brand building and repositioning clarifies your messaging, but it can't compensate for a product that doesn't fit a defined need. Same with sales enablement and playbooks. It improves execution, but it often forces sales teams to compensate for upstream structural ambiguity. Artificial intelligence, my favorite. It's just a glorified autocomplete that accelerates execution, but it doesn't determine whether the opportunity itself is structurally sound. Remember what we said, they missed the market. That means you have a structurally unsound opportunity in the first place. Artificial intelligence is going to enable you to be very precise and very inaccurate. More activity, that's the beatings will stop when morale improves, right? More campaigns, more calls, more channels, increase motion, but not alignment with the market opportunity. Same with cost cutting. It improves margin temporarily, but it doesn't restore the proper direction. In other words, if your problem fits one of those solutions, that's great, but if it doesn't, you're out of luck. Oh, okay, here we go. So here's the question. What are we really looking at? When marketing says we don't have enough leads, when sales says the leads are bad, when product says the messaging is wrong, when finance says customer acquisition costs are rising, and when leadership says the market's difficult right now, probably, they're all talking about different perspectives on the same condition. And it's probably not functional, and it's probably not execution. It's usually structural. And by the way, something that no one is usually looking at because it's cross-functional. I like that slide. Okay. So what's the structure or lack of it that's causing the problem? What's the elephant in the room? Well, in our experience, it comes down to the definition of a market opportunity. That is, it's not the go-to-market that's wrong. It's the who are we and why do we exist that are the problem. Or put another way, when you miss the market, it's usually because you took your eye off the ball. And so what was that ball that you took your eye off of? That's the market opportunity itself. And yes, you can look at it in layman's terms and it works just fine, but we'll get a little technical here. So let's look at the structure of a market opportunity and the discipline that requires when you're going to market to try to capture it. Before I get through it, though, I need to make one thing clear. I've been working this problem for 40 years. I got my MBA in marketing and strategic planning at Rutgers University. I got a graduate certificate in strategic planning at Wharton, and I've worked with thousands of businesses over the years. I and my company, not just me. And I can tell you one thing, other than on day 2 of your intro to marketing course, they do not teach you this in school, and you can't get a job in it when you come out of school. But it's the critical path item when it comes to being successful in the market. So let's look at it now. Simply put, and this is going to seem mindlessly obvious, except when you try to execute it in a functional business, right? Simply put, every business opportunity requires 3 things: a product, a defined need whose economic consequences justify purchasing that product, and a population experiencing that need that you can access. Or more prosaically, a profitable market opportunity requires that a product or service be applied to a defined need that's experienced by a homogeneous segment of prospects that the organization can access and satisfy in a way perceived to be superior relative to substitutes. Remove any of those things and you've got nothing. No market, no opportunity. If you can't access your prospects, you're out of luck. If they don't have a need, you're out of luck. And if you can't satisfy that need in a way perceived to be superior to substitutes, you're out of luck. It's that simple. Well, I shouldn't say not that simple. There's a lot of science on how to solve that problem. In fact, most organizations, even if they understand the concept, can't figure out how to solve the problem for themselves. But it's amazing how many businesses fail because they don't understand their own market opportunity. They don't understand what they're trying to accomplish. Or they get caught up, and this is very common, with the functional implementations in order to go after that market opportunity, the go-to-market steps, but they're totally disconnected from the nature of the opportunities they're trying to capitalize on. Sometimes it's due to siloing, sometimes it's due to perverse incentives, but it's always because no one in the organization has responsibility for maintaining fidelity to that opportunity structure. We have a name for it. We call it commercialization drift, where basically the business takes their eye off the ball, which you can see here. So there's this thing we refer to as alignment, which basically says what we talked about, which is a profitable market opportunity requires that a product or service be applied to a defined need that's experienced by a homogeneous segment of prospects that an organization can access and satisfy in a way perceived to be superior relative to substitutes. And here's what it looks like when it's working on the left side of the slide here. An aligned opportunity. The product addresses a defined need experienced by a homogeneous segment that you can access, that is, you can talk to them, right? The messaging then becomes clear because you're talking about the need. Your sales conversations are consistent because you're talking about how you can solve that problem. And growth is predictable because you've got a market that you can go after and you understand their propensity to buy and their willingness to pay. And then there's drift, which you can see on the right side of the slide. Commercialization drift happens when the product expands into multiple applications, needs become abstract. You know, there's a saying we talked about, nobody needs a drill. They need a hole. You've got to be talking about the hole, not the drill. Anyway, needs become abstract, like things like efficiency and growth. Your target audience broadens either because your channels of access require you to broaden who you're going after, or you simply are guessing who might be interested in buying your product. So your messaging becomes generalized, your sales cycles lengthen, your win rates decline, you name it. We talked about all the problems before. Failure is as predictable as sunrise when you use this model, or more accurately, when you don't use it. If you don't keep your eye on the ball, failure is almost inevitable. Okay, let's talk about some more drift symptoms, some additional symptoms that you're getting off the rails with your market. If your target market keeps expanding, oh, we could sell this to almost anyone. Or, excuse me, you have multiple unrelated use cases or promoted simultaneously. Different departments describe the customer differently. Sales success depends heavily on individual reps rather than a repeatable pattern. With respect to your messaging and positioning, if your value proposition changes frequently, if your messaging focuses on capabilities rather than outcomes, if different marketing materials emphasize different problems, you're going to fail. With your product, if features accumulate without a clear application logic, if the product roadmap is driven by large customers rather than segment logic, you're going to fail. If product demos vary widely depending on who's presenting, you're in trouble. In your sales process, if sales cycles become unpredictable, if win rates vary across similar accounts, or if prospects require extensive education before they recognize the need, you're going to fail. Think about that. How many marketing programs are designed to, quote, educate the prospect? You might as well quit while you're ahead. With your marketing, campaign performance varies widely across channels, or lead generation produces volume but little revenue impact, you're going to fail. These are symptoms of drift. A few more and then we'll wrap it up. If your customer acquisition costs rise across multiple channels simultaneously, if your forecast accuracy declines despite better data systems, if your discounting increases even when demand appears strong, if your sales and marketing people are blaming each other for their not making their numbers, these are more clues that you're off track. And you're not off track within the function, you're off track between the functions. That is, when a single symptom appears, sure, this cause may be tactical, but when many symptoms appear simultaneously, the probability of a structural problem rises dramatically. Here's a diagnostic. Somebody recommended we do this. You can do this yourself. If you look at your product, your needs, your segmentation, your sales, your marketing, any number of areas can give you a symptom or a suggestion that you've got a structural problem, not a tactical problem. And the difference is as clear as night and day. Tactical problem, plug and play, get rid of a person, change a program, that's it. Structural problem, you got to step back and rethink what is your meaning to the market. So here's a diagnostic. Commercialization drift, by the way, rarely appears suddenly. It emerges through subtle signals across the organization. If several of the following conditions are present simultaneously, structural drift may be occurring. That is, you maybe have taken your eye off the ball. Product, features added in response to competition rather than defined need intensity. Product capabilities described more clearly than their applications. An application is the use of a technology to solve a problem. If you're not talking about applications, if you're talking about products, you're going to have a problem. Roadmaps driven by the loudest customer. If needs are described by abstractions rather than pain points and problems, you're off the rails. If the economic magnitude of the problem that you're trying to solve with your business is unclear or it's assumed either by you or by your prospect, you're in trouble. If multiple different problems are grouped into one narrative, you're guaranteed to fail. If you have target markets that are defined by demographics rather than shared needs, you're in trouble. There's a concept called ideal customer profile. There are a few concepts that I've come across in my 40 years in this business that are more idiotic than the ideal customer profile. Just take that for what it's worth. If you have something called an ideal customer profile, somebody's cheating. If win rates vary widely across accounts that appear similar, that shouldn't happen. If lead volume is prioritized over simple structural fit, the quality of the lead, you have a problem. If sales complains about lead quality, if CRM tracks activity but not defined need conditions, here's another clue coming off the script for a moment. If you're looking at something called MQLs, you are just stepping right off the cliff. When they invented the concept of an MQL, it's because the CRM developers were engineers, not salespeople. And MQL is what I'm an old guy, baby boomer, right? In the advertising world, used to call waste. It is not a qualified lead. It's not even worth paying for. MQL is junk. Just saying. Financial signals. Financial people should be looking at this problem too. If you have to discount to increase closed deals, if customer acquisition costs are rising across channels, if forecast accuracy declines, if one or two of these signals appears, problem might be just execution or tactical. If several of these signals appear in your company, you got to look across functions. The issue is unlikely to be tactical. It's likely to be structural. And if 4 or more of these things are happening with your company today, drift is already underway and you're in trouble. You need to pull back. What do you got? Let me leave you with one thought because we're getting on in time. Most organizations try to fix commercialization problems with better execution, better marketing, better sales tools, more features. But if what we've talked about today is happening in your business, multiple problems, it's probably not an execution problem. It's a structural problem. And structural problems don't respond to tactical fixes. Now, some of you will recognize parts of this. You'll see a few symptoms and think, yeah, we've dealt with that. But if you're seeing multiple symptoms at the same time, inconsistent win rates, rising acquisition costs, longer sales cycles, marketing activity without revenue, then there's a high probability that commercialization drift is already underway. And at that point, the question is, what campaign should we run? It's, are we actually aligned with the real market opportunity anymore? That's not something most organizations, by the way, can answer internally, at least not objectively, because incentives, siloing, and functional structure legislates against looking across issues to try to identify how you took your eye off the ball, you as a company, not you as an individual. So here's what I'd suggest. If this resonates, if you're seeing these patterns in your business, we put together a short working session where we can walk through your situation and help you determine whether or not you have a structural issue with respect to your market opportunity. No pitch, no commitment, just a clear answer on whether what you're dealing with drift or something else that can be solved with all the million different tools that are out there. You can grab a time on our calendar. There it is, leadgen.com/calendar, or just reach out to me directly on LinkedIn and mention the worst workshop. Worst case, you walk away knowing that this isn't your problem. Best case is you'll fix something that's been quietly undermining your business before it gets worse. Questions?